Welcome back to Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Ben Givarz. This is a show about how creatives use technology to tell their stories, and my guest today is mix engineer Rich Keller. Rich was instrumental in helping to shape the sound of classic hip-hop as a mix engineer for the likes of Notorious B.I.G., Nas, Wu-Tang Clan, The Beatnuts, Snoop Dogg, Eve, DMX, and many, many more. He has recently mixed in Dolby Atmos the legendary back catalog of De La Soul, including for the 35th anniversary of their iconic 1989 debut record, 3 Feet High and Rising, a record, of course, revered for its pioneering use of sampling and production, and an album recognized as one of Rolling Stone's greatest albums of all time, Apple Music's 100 Best Albums, and an album that's included in the National Recording Registry by the Library of Congress. Rich shares how he also worked with the De La Soul team to recreate the stereo mix of 3 Feet High and Rising to draw from for the Dolby Atmos mix, how he treats objects and beds for precise placement and creative effect using Dolby Atmos. He also shares some tips for how he keeps the punch in the hip-hop mixes that he does and what new mixers can do to achieve best results in their work. So Rich has mixed over 1,300 tracks in Dolby Atmos and is continuing his legacy of defining the sound of classic hip-hop as he did in stereo, now in Dolby Atmos. Enjoy. All right, so excited to have a chance to sit down for a few minutes with mix engineer Rich Keller. Rich, thanks for doing this. Good to see you. How are you?
Great. My pleasure, Ben. Great to be here. Nice to see you. You're looking well, young man.
Thank you. You too, sir. All right. So take us into your background a little bit. You've been based in the New York area where you've been mixing for many, many years, mixing some of hip hop's greats, right? Like Yep. Notorious B.I.G., Snoop Dogg, Nas, Method Man, Beatnuts, one of my personal favorites going back into the 90s and early 2000s.
You know, New York gangster rap, that's pretty much it. And some R&B in there, a little Mariah Carey, a little this, a little, what is it, 3LW, or what was it back in the day? There's a list. You can check it out. It's a good list. It kept me busy. I can still hear. I don't have tinnitus. I'm good. So, but I know if I was a rock engineer, I'd have problems because of the frequencies. But hip hop, we got the low end going on, so it's not so bad. But anyway.
Share a little bit about like how you got your start in the business and like what have been kind of some of your highlights along your path to sort of where you are today.
For me, music, I've been playing instruments all my life, from accordion to guitar to trombone to bass, and bass stuck as my main instrument that, from 8th grade on. Got a degree in classical bass. I wound up finishing school at City College in New York. I got to study with jazz legend Ron Carter. That was really fascinating and amazing, and what a great experience it was. And then, I was playing in bands around New York in the 80s, doing my thing, played in wedding bands, played, club bands. We were doing, we started doing showcases for record labels, backing up singers. I had a rhythm section that I worked with. And, as a bass player, I've met a lot of bass players who kind of do all the stuff in the background. You're running sound, you're moving the PA, you're taking care of everything, you're organizing for everyone else because the lead guitar player ain't going to do it. The drummer's too busy with his shit. The lead singer's got his head up his ass. So, so the bass player's got to handle all the business, right? So, and that's, that kind of became like my MO for just handling things. And long story short, I made some friends over at Sam Ash Pro, and in 90, I think it was 90 or 91, the first Digitools came out, and it was the first Pro Tools. It was Design Digitools. It was a two-track digital recorder, right? So you could see the waveform. That was the first time. I mean, aside from the samplers, you could actually see it in a computer, and we had the Mac SE at that point, a great little computer to play asteroids on. Anyway. Beyond that, so and my buddy got the gig to Def Jam producers came into Sam Ash Pro, and they came in and they wanted him to edit the curses out of verses. So they used Digitools to do that. And then so my buddy got inside at Def Jam because all of a sudden he was like, hey, bring him in here. Let's get that done. And then he got the call to do the Pete Nice album, Pete Nice and third bass, with Pete Nice with Daddy Rich, which was third bass that split up. So anyway, first solo album for Pete Nice and Daddy Rich. And my buddy asked me to come and engineer just because I was facile on the boards and everything was, I enjoyed it. I already had, I'd been programming. I had a little Fostex. I had a 4-track cassette. So I'd really learned a lot and I was into it. And the producers on that session were the Beatnuts. And so I got in with them, and all of a sudden, they had no idea that I'd really never mixed a record in my life. I was just a home hobby kind of musician, kind of jack of all trades guy who was, a bass player essentially. And, but I understood jazz well, I understood time well, and I could play bass really, pretty good. So, they were like, yo, you're a useful guy. You can loop really good. You know how to use the table. You know the music. You understand jazz completely, and you can replay bass lines for us, and your mixes sound dope. So why don't we use you? And then all of a sudden, they brought me into the studio scene in New York. I was at Chungking, Green Street, Battery, running around with them, and then I just, instantly just gravitated into the Def Jam scene, the Real Relativity, Columbia. I started working for all those labels and all the studios, and it got to the point where Chungking started calling me. The manager, Laura at Chungking, she kept calling me for gigs. And then it was Onyx. And then it was like, hey, we've got this group that they're called the Wu-Tang Clan. And the leader is RZA. And there's a song by Method Man. Did you hear that? The other song he had? Now they're doing an album. You want to come in? RZA wants a mixer. He doesn't like the mixes he has. So, I got him call at midnight to come and mix. And it was the song was Bring the Pain. He'd already had 4 guys try to mix it, and he didn't like it. So he kept calling people. And I got the call, and a couple hours after working on it with him, there's more stories to go there, but we don't have time for all that. So, but I wound up mixing "Bring the Pain" with RZA, and that was my first platinum single. That really catapulted me, into like hip hop, like in demand hip hop guy. He's so that was pretty cool. And then doing the Onyx album, But there's, like I say, there's a lot of more backstory, but. Well, that gets us there. So RZA and Wu-Tang led me to Rough Riders. Basically, everybody else after that, this was like 95, I think. So after that, people ask me, yo, what have you done? I'd get a recommendation for a gig, and I'd go there, and they say, what have you done? I say, Bring the Pain. They're like, oh, okay, go ahead. So that's, it just built on that. And I realized, wow, I work for the producers, not so much the A&R people, because they come and go. But the producers that are successful, that's your money right there. So I got in with I got in with all the different producers. Then I got the call for Rough Riders needed an engineer. And I went in there, I mixed the record for him, and the whole posse was like, yo, you down? Because we need a guy like you. And that was it. And 7 years later, I emerged.
Wow.
With 11 platinum albums and 5 #1 albums. Like, it was crazy. With the Locks and Eve and the Rough Rider anthems, the compilations, and all the DMX albums, 5 DMX albums. So, so that kept me busy. Then I moved over to, got another call after X went to jail. I was alongside of all of this. I was doing jazz. I was always working with jazz artists on the side, like the guys from Lenny White from Return to Forever, Stanley Clark, Michael Urbaniak, jazz violinist. So I always had the jazz current going alongside the hip hop current, but the hip hop paid and the jazz was for love and little money, but love, the 2000s and the 2007 came and everything kind of the industry crashed. And, so then I wound up doing some startups that are music-based startups to, do different things. But that brings us to the present where I just, now here we are all these years later, and I'm still working with a lot of, a few artists from Def Jam, but I'm doing a lot of Atmos, a lot of catalog stuff. And I'm working with Fredo Bang from Def Jam, doing some of his stuff, and also more on the Interscope side. I'm working with some of the younger artists there and doing a lot of Atmos as well, and did tons of catalog for Interscope. So, basically Interscope, Def Jam, and then UMG catalog as well. So that's what's keeping me busy for the last 4 or 5 years is swimming in that soup.
Wow,
it's good.
Thanks for sharing all of that. Wow, you mentioned so many records that are like formidable records of my youth and my background as well. Like,
wow.
Pete Nice in third base, right into the Beatnuts and Wu-Tang Clan and all of those records. I didn't grow up listening to jazz music. I did grow up listening to hip hop. The first cassette tape I ever bought was Run DMC's Raising Hell. And what I didn't know at the time when I was listening to that, and even into like the 90s and listening to, those hip hop records that you mentioned, was all of the sampling that they were doing from these jazz records. They gave me an appreciation for that music and made me want to go back and dig, like Premier's production Productions and Pete
Yeah.
Rock
Oh, yeah.
Productions and all of those things. That educated me about that music. You know, I was of a little bit of a different generation. I graduated high school in 95. So like right as all of that stuff was, you know, really happening. And growing up in Maryland, we were getting a lot of it from, you know, New York and from Philly and all over the East Coast. So a conversation for another time, my friend, but thank you for sharing all of that. That's really exciting.
Music. You know, another group that was very important to me that I didn't mention was KMD.
Oh,
actually, and then another one that was even deeper underground than KMD was the Juggernauts.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you hip to the Juggernauts, Kevin Smith and those guys. Yo, that shit, those days at Chunk King mixing that stuff was transcendental. And I don't mean from, you know, doing drugs or anything. It was just the music. It was just, we were tripping. We were all in there just vibing and zoning. It was amazing. It was really special.
KMD with a young pre-MF Doom and a sub rock like on there, just breaking rules.
They lived at my house for a few weeks. They crashed out because it was too far to Long Island. They were like, "Yo, Rich, can we just crash here?" I'm like, "Yeah, I was a bachelor. What I here? Take the couch. Here's some pillows. Here's some blankets. Let's go." And they'd wake up and make beats, you know, and like it was crazy. It was crazy times. We had a lot of fun.
You start your journey mixing in Dolby Atmos actually with an artist you mentioned that you had a great relationship with, DMX, on what would sadly be the final album he made while he was living, right? The album Exodus.
Yes, there is more to come though for DMX fans. There's more to come. There's some paperwork to be handled, but there's more to come.
Well, RIP to the man, and his music will live on for sure. So take us into like some of the early days of mixing in Atmos around the Exodus project or the album. You know, like what did you discover about mixing in Atmos on that project that like inspired you to want to continue doing it?
Honestly, like I had never done, you know, 5.1 or 7.1. I was just a stereo guy and that was it. So to wrap my brain around what is a bed, and even more so, what is an object? Like it just, you know, sparks were going off like, this does not compute. I've been doing it 30 years this way. And now you're telling me there's all this other shit that I can do and I don't understand. So it really took me a while to just open my head up and get out of my own way to understand what was going on. And for that, you know, I reached out to some friends. I reached out to my buddy Tom Cadley, who did all the surround and Atmos stuff back in the day for what's the guitar, the video game, Guitar Rock Band or Rockstar or something. Yeah. Where they had stems, the first thing of stems.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Come at you and you'd play the guitar.
Guitar Hero. Yeah.
So my buddy Tom did all that. And that was all stemming. I don't know if it was Dolby, but it was definitely like 7.1 and all this. So I reached out to him. I was like, Tom, you're the surround guy. Please enlighten me. And he gave me a primer in that. And I was like, all right, that's a start. And I started playing with it. I got the software, and but it really conceptually, I just couldn't grasp it, you know. And then also I had to build a setup, right? I had to get the speakers and understand all that, and then understand how, you know, I've got my red line 16 now. But before that, I started with the Scarlett. I had a Scarlett 18i20, which is just you know, it has 10 outputs. But the 16 obviously has 16. So that worked better. I could do a 7.1.2 with it. And I started on 7.1.2. I was like, well, this is all I got. Let me figure it out. And, you know, you just got to work with what you have. And I really cobbled together speakers before I even built it with the MTMs, you know. So, and I had to explore. I also was introduced to the guys over in the New York Dolby studio, Darren Hallinan. Yeah, Darren, he's a great guy. He really helped me out a lot he let me come up and just showed me around, played me the Rocket Man and the classic ones we have now. And actually, you know, there was an eye-popping moment for me there when Post Malone's Circles.
Yes,
that was a defining moment for me. Hearing that in the Dolby Studios really flipped around, because all the other mixes I heard there, the demos that Dolby had set up, were really more stereo based with some things moving around. I never really got the full 360 view. And there were two songs that did it for me. One was Circles, Post Malone. And what caught me about that is, you know, the bass line, once it comes in, doo, 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 right?
So that funky kind of walking bass line.
Yeah, that funky walking bass line. That's the hook of the song.
Yeah.
So it starts out without it, and the whole song is kind of around you. The pads are around you, and the beat's in front of you. And that bass line came in 100% behind me. And I went, whoa. And I was like, okay, this is special, and that was the crack in the armor of like, all right, this is Dolby, this is something new. And then my buddy Tom, he had sent over a John Mayer mix he had just done for Sony in Atmos. And same thing. He started with the guitars that rose up above me. And then I was like, wait a minute. I'm back. I'm 15 years old again. My first car. Okay. I'm a car guy. I had a 1966 Dodge Dart in 1976, right? I'm aging myself now. But in that car, I wired it out with, I decked it out with power amps, extra power amps hanging under my Pioneer car stereo with the extra amps for the subs in the trunk, the 6x9s in the back deck, plus the new Pioneer separate tweeters they had that had crossovers. So you could adjust them and with a level so I could position the stereo image correctly. They were right in between the door jambs. And then I had new speakers in the fronts and I put new speakers in the doors. So I could rock out. And I was listening from like Zeppelin to Coltrane to Van Halen to the Cars, all of it. And I was rocked out and I would tweak and tune it. This is what I was doing in my teenage years. I did the same thing in my house. My bass amp was a subwoofer to my stereo and I had the kitchen wired, my brother's room. I just ran wires all throughout the house. My dad was like, what the fuck happened? Drilling holes in the walls and shit. I was like, yeah, it's just pedaling, Dad. Because, yeah, well, all right. Anyway, long story short, I've always been this was always in me. And I was like, wait, this is just the same thing. I want that feeling of when I was in my car, when I had control over this sphere dome of music. And I rocked out with it. And everybody loved to get in my car and do that. And that's once I realized, oh, wait, this is just that. Do that. So then I knew I had a home. Now I had a center. Now I had a place to judge it from. And then I was like, all right, so what do I got to do to set up this Dolby, studio so properly? All right, now I got through I know what it is, and now I have all these weird speakers that I've grabbed and borrowed and pulled out of the back room. I was like, that's not going to work. So, I was working with Alex. He was working for IK Multimedia at the time, and he was like, hey, why don't you try the MTMs? And I was like, all right. So they gave me the engineer price and all that on a bunch of boxes of these speakers. So, bottom line, what I got was it's Stonehenge with a ceiling.
Nice.
Well, that's what I built, and I kept it really simple because the picture I saw was literally a circle, right? It wasn't about dealing with an elongated room, and fortunately, I'm in a basement, so I'm in a pretty moderately a pretty small space, but I do have a 24-foot depth, so that's I can mix down here. The bass goes back there; it doesn't come back up, and at least to my mix position. So my mix position is nice and clear. And the first thing, people said they came down, says, well, you got to put the speakers in the back. I'm like, bro, no, I don't. I'm not dealing with any of that time aligning stuff. Like I'm not taking it to the next level. I just want it my car. I want the speakers. So what I did is I took my hand and a drumstick and I extended it. And I just did a circle and made a radius up and down and around me.
It's equidistant now.
Bro, I'm talking, right? Nice. This is how it is. Yep. This is how it is. They go up at an angle, and there it is. So that's how I built it. And so you're looking at what's in front of me. That's what am I facing, and then of course right behind me is the same thing. Plus I got the sides. So and once I realized that having everything equidistant was great, then I started doing some test mixes for real, and I took them up to Dolby, and I sent them out to Capitol Studios because UMG, this was all new. Everybody, there were the guys that had done it for a long time, but then it was the new, let's do everything in Atmos now. So, and of course, when Def Jam asked me, Rich, do you know how to do Atmos? I was like, yes,
I do.
Show up. So, and we still, we had some time, and I had some time to learn.
Sure.
So and once I took my mixes, the first mixes I did where I was like, I'm in my car now, I'm going to do it like that. And I built out the room to do it. And I took those mixes over to Dolby in the city, in New York. And Darren and the guys were like, holy shit, you got it. You got it. You're filling up the room. Wow, amazing, cool, motion and all that. Like, bro, you got it. Keep going. Do what you're doing. And I got the same feedback. Well, I'll give one tip that'll help others, about one thing that I learned along the way. The feedback I got from Capitol Studios on an earlier mix just a real rough test mix that actually had the SMPTE in it, which feels like, because you don't, first renderer, don't anybody use 3.7 ever. They get rid of it. Upgrade. We'll talk about upgrades later, but the first Dolby renderer had lots of fun glitches in it that we had to work around, but won't bother, sorting those out here because it takes too much time and cause too much frustration. But so as I was saying, the feedback I got that's important for that, people watching who might want to know is that I really, at first, I understood the concept of the object, but I thought, because I had learned from guys who had done it years and years past, and I didn't know any other current guys that were really doing the hot albums to check with, see what's going on. And at that point, you couldn't stream it from Apple like that, so you had to have the ADM file. So it's not like people were sharing ADM files that easily. What I got back from Capitol Studios was like, I used the bed for a lot of stuff. And the feedback from the chief engineers over there were like, Rich, you definitely, you're moving stuff around. Sounds great. You got the space. You've developed the space. Great. The music sits beautifully. You feel comfortable. But here's the but. But you're so much of your main stuff is in the bed that I've got 22 speakers here. And you're not touching half of them because they're in the bed. Now get into those objects, right? And create a template bed for your using objects. And now you're touching, because, utilizing the difference between a bed and the object. The object is all of that space. You can put anything anywhere and have the binaural, right? So to go with it. So, you can do binaural in the bed as well, but I don't. And so basically from that point on, I moved out of the bed and into the objects. And that's where I build now exclusively. I don't, unless required somewhere, I don't use the bed.
You've built out your system. You've done your experiments. You've built on your passion for surround sound music without even intending to become an immersive or surround sound mixer, just out of the love of having the speakers around you. Now you understand the system. You understand how your mixes are translating. You've kind of got your style down. You've got your process down. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because you then get the opportunity to mix what's widely regarded as one of the greatest and most influential classic hip hop albums of all time, which I'm sure you were a fan of anyway, right? But of course, we're talking about De La Soul's 1989 debut record, 3 Feet High and Rising, which, along with the subsequent albums, really like all classics in their own right too, right? Certainly De La is Dead, Balloon Mind State, and Stakes is High, of course, famously or infamously not available on streaming services, even in stereo, due to the control of the masters, but widely regarded as classics for sure. Yeah. So, in fact, such an important and iconic record that 3 Feet High and Rising was actually selected to the Library of Congress and added to the National Recording Registry in 2010. So that timed with like the 35th anniversary of the original release of 3 Feet High and Rising. Like the entire hip hop community and industry is looking forward to this dropping on streaming services, right? So can you share a little bit about like what was going on at that time around, the preparation, not just for the Atmos mix, but like for these releases, these re-releases and this record, and just kind of like the buzz and the energy in New York around, the anniversary and the release of this actually happening, and then your opportunity to mix it?
Probably the best place I could start is A&R of the project was Faith Newman. Mm-hmm. And I've known Faith since early 90s. She was at Columbia Records. She signed Nas to Columbia. So, and she and I have maintained a relationship since then. And that's another thing. For longevity in this game, it's about people, it's about showing up, and it's about doing your great work, doing your best. And take care of what people need. You deliver for everyone else, and they'll keep calling you. So, but back to the initial De La question. So Faith. It was long story short on how I got into that. It was a kind of a quirk that someone had mentioned me. One of the STEM creators, Audio Shake, the president of Audio Shake, was going around. She creates AI stems, right? So she was meeting with publishers and labels and, and trying to get them to engage with her platform and use her platform. So, and she happened to be at Reservoir Publishing, which is where Faith is now head of A&R development. And so she she happened to mention my name as someone where Rich Keller is a mixer that we recommend if you need a mixer, he can. And she was like, "Oh my God, Rich Keller, sure." And so she called me up, "Rich, I didn't know you were doing Atmos." So that was the first thing. And then I went to meet with her. Then I got to talk to Paz and the engineers they'd been working for years already. I think it was like 2 years back. I'm not sure about their history. I know when I jumped in, right? And I got, obviously there was the whole mountain of half-inch tapes, 2-inch tapes, sessions that were recreated off the 2-inch tapes, and then original sessions merged with them. And then, I'd say they'd done about 90% of the work of they had to open up a lot of the songs on the first album in order to replace samples, swap out things that couldn't be cleared. Because that's what Reservoir was doing. Basically, they bought the label and they just ingested it all and said, okay, we're going to work on getting it out. We're going to really negotiate with these rights owners to get as many of these samples as we can. But the ones we couldn't get, we had to replace. So that first operation had to happen. So we had to finish dissecting and inserting, little operations of getting, getting it into. Now, a lot of times, a sample would be in the middle of cuts. There'd be, but you can leave the cut, but you can't leave you can't leave the sound. So we're literally cutting in between cuts and replacing just where you hear the sample, but not the actual rubs, to keep it just that right flow, not to redo it because it'll never be the same again. So there's so many things. Wow. It was a deep dive. And then when we started bringing up the original master, the original, CD, the original released stereo, there were timing differences, and we were like, wow, what's going on here? And then we realized, oh, vari-speed. Back in the day, that vari-speed could be done at the studio and at mastering. Like, it's a little slow. Can you tweak it a little? So now all of a sudden, there was no auto-tune used on any of it, so it didn't affect the pitch in that way, but it did affect all the looping. So then re-looping things with a vari-sped Pro Tools and determining that vari-speed was a, trial and error, rocket, till all of a sudden we've got phase cancellation. And that's it for that. It was like, so it was a challenge. It was a challenge to get that right. But what we wound up doing for that whole album, we mixed off the recovered multis, and I completely referenced all the original masters by Tom Coyne, and because I thought they were phenomenal. So and it was Scotty. Scotty was the engineer. I just know him as Scotty. I should say his name here. Look for Scotty on the credits. He's on the credits too. So, I don't want to leave anybody out, but he really did the heavy lifting to put the sessions together. And then I just took the ball from him and kept going and finished a lot of the tweaks and got the vari-speeds all correct. And then we started just really balancing the mixes. And at that point, I was like, well, I need to go sit with Paz. And he was based in Miami. So I set up one song, the 3 is the magic number. I said, let's work on this song until it's great. So I got an Atmos version of it up with everything in it. So it was a multi-track Atmos session. It wasn't stems, right? It was literally the multi-track with all our pieces chopped in. So I set it all up and I said, okay, I need to go. Where is he? He's in Miami. All right. So I found an Atmos room that's the real deal with, Augsburgers and beautiful Atmos setup, what was the name of that place? It was a weird name, but it was a great studio. I want to
in
shout
Miami.
Yeah, in Miami, AF Studio or something. I'll get it. We'll add it on the link. But the bottom line is, he took good care of us. He set us up, the studio owner, and he put us in the room. And then I got to know Paz, and we went through the songs. I explained Atmos to him. I explained how the stereo reference, how I was using that as a reference and using it as a guide to recreate the mix. And also get the master the same, and then make sure that once we've achieved the stereo version and it matched the original master, once I got that in tune, then I applied that to the multi-track, which was yet another process of how do you apply mastering to individual tracks, and that's a science that I've been working on. It still evolves. It's a method of trial and error and just all the crazy plugins that can, listen to something, analyze it, and recreate it in some way. So I've been through a whole bunch of those. And it was challenging, but ultimately we got it done. And he was like, bro, just do it to the rest. Just continue as you were, and that was that. And then we were just doing the phone thing every couple of weeks, because I had 3 months to take care of 6 albums. So we had to remix them, create Atmos, and basically remaster the stereo. So because we had new stereos, and I had to remaster them to match, right? And then and there was one other thing that happened at that point. Let me remember that. Yeah, we would have our meetings every 2 weeks or so. I'd send him a batch. He'd go to the studio. He would listen and check them, make sure everything was cool. Oh, and then I said on a group call once with Faith and Paz and everyone on it, I said, "Oh, hey, do you guys have clean versions?" I mean, I was a diligent engineer. I asked the correct question. But boy, I wasn't expecting what I got.
Did they?
They didn't curse a lot.
No.
These songs are like 4 and 5 minute songs.
Yeah.
And they're just spitting endlessly from, and one little curse in there just bloop, flies by. Yeah. And all of a sudden I'm searching. I've got 20 curses in a 5-minute song, but they're microscopic. So so everything, just the train hit the wall. And I had to go back and clean everything and duplicate it all in a clean. Oh, I was like, so then I got 2 assistants to help me do that. I was like, guys, just microscope this shit. Just go down and give me an A/B on the playlist, right? Just do a duplicate playlist. Yeah. And then we got to do everything in, duplicate. So that slowed me down quite a bit. I definitely lost some hair that month off the back of my head, because it was pretty stressful, because the deadline was hard.
Still looking good though.
Yeah, all right, thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah, the deadline was a hard deadline from Apple, because Apple was actually sponsoring this whole mission. Yeah,
and they wanted to do the catalog.
Yeah, they wanted to drop it. So I was racing a deadline that was way bigger than like, we want to drop it in the summer. Like, no. It was like, whatever, April 30th, Rich, you're done. You're turned in, and it's approved, and like, there's no going back, bro. It's the cliff. So I was like, all right. And we hustled, me and my guys, and we hustled, and we got it done.
You did. And it turned out great, man. Like, really fantastic. And I want to ask about 3 is the magic number, but just to set the stage a little bit around, the reputation, which we already talked about, of 3 Feet High and Rising, but also like the production, it's a sonic masterpiece in stereo, right? In its own right. It's a revered album that, of course, pushed boundaries at the time for what was possible with production. You got Prince Paul kind of establishing himself really as producer. I mean, of course, he produced it along with the other guys, and he had been in Stetsasonic and had done some third bass tracks and all of that, but this is where he kind of really shines, right? And is certainly revered as, like you're saying, one of the great sampling records of all time. It's so dense and brilliant. And I noticed on 3 is the magic number in particular, like some of the 3s that are said are like in the rears, some of the scratches are in the rears, and then some are kind of in the front. And then like when the James Brown countdown kind of goes from the rears to the front, it's so cool. And then like the end part, the samples are kind of like talking to each other. They're kind of like bouncing around a little bit. Like, how did you experiment with like placing those? Like, did you have in mind that you wanted them to kind of move around as they're talking to each other? Or did it just kind of happen as you were experimenting with what was possible with movement or placement?
I'm a natural reaction kind of guy. I don't think about shit first. You know what I mean? So it's like I said, when that bass line hit of Post Malone bass line hit me in the back, I was like, oh, all right, cool. So I had that kind of energy, that set a spark in me of like, obviously, here's what we can do. And, the thing with mixing hip hop and Atmos is oftentimes the elements that you have to deal with are very few.
Yeah.
Compared to a pop arrangement. I've done some pop stuff, dance stuff as well, some indie stuff. And I mean, generally for the labels, I do hip hop. I do other music as well. And I'm, pretty good.
Yeah.
But, like Living Color, I've mixed rock records and, like jazz records, Mariah Carey, like it's cool, but, hip hop is my thing. So I'll take it. It's fine. But there are usually very few elements. Mm-hmm. And I don't do a lot of automated panning. I would rather work with counterpoint in the arrangement. So like I'll separate instruments that are talking to each other, and I'll, put them front to back or side to side, and do it like that rather than just like grabbing things and panning it and moving it, because let me address an era before I got to De La Soul, because I started with the DMX and it was, a slow start, learning curve. Then I got into the Interscope catalog and Def Jam catalog, and that's where I cut my teeth for real with challenging sources. Because with the DMX, I had the multis here. I knew them really well. I knew it inside and out. They were all prepped. Everything was easy on that end. But then dealing with a whole onslaught of files like, stems from, 1997. Like, okay, how do we make this sound like back to that? And I realized that I wound up doing like the Babies catalog, Playboy Cardi, Tory Lanez, a lot of Rick Ross stuff. I mean, it's a long list. I don't even remember half of it was a blur. 2022 and 23 were like a blur for me. But I learned how to deal with, tricky source material and how to make it work. And the one thing, because they did it like a shoot off, like Juice World, for the Juice World catalog for at Interscope. Nicole Wiscarco had given me a call and she goes, Rich, you do Atmos, right? And I said, yeah. She goes, well, why don't you join this shootout? Manny's in it and there's a few other big guys in it. Why don't you come and shoot out here? We'll send you the files. It's Juice World. We want to, we're going to start catalog now and we're starting with Juice World. I said, okay, send me the file. So I did it. But I had did it with what I learned from DMX, you know what I mean? So I had already really explored and expanded my horizons, and I got my sound together of what I was cool with and what everybody else was loving. So I was like, all right, let me just do that, and so this is 2022, right? It's just a year later. So 2 years before De La Soul, right? So with that project, the feedback I got was like, I kept the text. I kept a screenshot. She's like, 1 million hearts, 5-6 hearts. You blew them all away. Your Atmos mixes rock. These are the best. Like, wow. Okay, cool. When can you start? I was like, tomorrow. Let's go. And that led to like I don't know, it was 800 or 900 songs just flowing at me at a regular pace. And I gained some weight. Didn't exercise enough. I just went deep. And went down and deep, and it was a great experience. So that after handling all of that for Interscope and Def Jam stuff as well, and it's about 300-400 songs for them. That's when I got the De La project in all its pieces. So I was ready for not a problem. Oh, piece of this, piece of that. We need to fly this from the CD and put this and stem this and little AI magic here and little that. Not a problem. I was ready for anything. I'd been to combat, and that's kind of how I feel now. So, I feel, confident. Like there's a lot of ways to skin any cat. And I know I've seen some videos where guys do like completely different things conceptually than I do, and which is great, so the only hard rules, there's only one hard rule that I maintain when doing Atmos. And it's, get your pens out. This is the one you want to write down. And this is the lesson that keeps on giving. When you're dealing with stereo stems, all right, keep them wide all the way, hard left and right. Because as soon as you bring it in, you've changed the mix. And my whole point of talking about reversing the conversation from De La Soul to what I learned with those massive amounts of UMG songs was that you got to keep the artist happy. You want the artist happy, and the artist had to check it, and they did. I mean, obviously Juice WRLD didn't, but the rest of them pretty much did have to do the headphone test. And if that shit didn't hit as hard as the stereo mix, you were done. So I survived all those field tests from the artists. And I've had artists here in my room, and I've had label executives here in my room, my little basement. They come down, they plop down, they sit down. They're like, all right. And I go back and forth to the stereo. Then they freak out. They're like, oh my God, that sounds incredible. And it sounds big, but it still sounds like my song. Thank you. And that's the critical thing. And so one little key to keeping it right is don't come off the walls with a stereo image, even no matter where you are. If it's front, back, left, right, up, down, do not decrease that, because especially if I've seen it done so many times because people want to focus the lead vocal. So they'll take a stereo lead vocal with reverb on it and everything. It's a stereo image, man. And if you jam it in to put it in the center or focus it, you've crushed that. You've all the phase cancellation, the image changes, the reverb changes, the vocal tone changes, everything's gone. And now you're like, it doesn't sound the same anymore. But it's the same. Oh, but it's the stem. Yeah, but it doesn't sound the same anymore. So you've really just, asked yourself out. So, when somebody hears that, they're going to bitch.
There you go, kids. There's the words of wisdom from Rich Keller on how to keep that punch and glue,
Yeah.
keep your stems as wide as possible, right? Keep that low end factor, the 808, the kick, the snap of the snare. And, that's how it's done.
And just another thought there, like if you really, spend time under the headphones and start moving things around, especially in the low end, like I always use it. We're taught, we're guided by UMG that we need to use 2 of the binaural audio fields, right? Near, mid, or far, right? I generally don't use far at all. I can't remember. Early on I did, but then when I heard what it was doing to the sound, it was just like, no, this is just too much for me. This is maybe for film or, in a different environment, great. But for music, it actually adds, what do you call it? It's slaps, right? It's adding, close room reflections to imitate the distance, right? And that's just too much, like, especially for percussive things, it just becomes, you can hear it. And that's not what we want. We want to hear spatialization, but I don't want to hear an extra tail or coming off of a hi-hat or something. So I generally keep the low end, the things I want the punchiest, I'll keep in the near field. So it's small and tight. And the deeper it is, the more I push it forward. Like the 808s, the kicks, they'll be about as forward as they can be. And then the bass will be pulled back from that, because there's so much space because we can pull it away from the wall in front of you. And if you just start, before you go crazy going all around, build the ball in front of you, build a sphere in front of you, and then expand it as much as you want to open up to everything. But if you build that ball really tight, you'll find that you can really maintain the integrity of the stereo mix while still spatializing it. You go back and forth, A, B, A, B. And better set up a 1-click A/B, because 2 clicks is not cool. 1 click, it switches. 1 click, it switches. Do that. So, because 2 clicks is too long. I like to A/B quick. And you hear things go back and forth. You can tell when things move. It's like overlapping star pictures. One star moves. That's how they discovered the size and the speed of the expansion of the universe.
It's bigger than just Atmos. It's
bigger. It's bigger than that.
Mixing in Atmos. Well, thank you for sharing all of that, man. So, where are you headed with Dolby Atmos? What excites you the most as a mixer? Where do you see things headed? What's coming up that gets you stoked?
Well, I think I'm waiting for it to get into cars. Like, I'm going to go back home and have that, I'm going to come back to my teens and have it in a car and be able to go mix in my car. I've mixed in my car. I literally have the first picture on my Instagram, because I signed up to Instagram right when it started. My kid said, "Dad, sign up for this." I'm like, all right. So I did, and I took a picture of myself mixing in my Maxima. I just went the aux in. It had an aux in, So I took my computer, aux in. I was mixing in my car. It had a Bose system in it or something, and It was great. So I want to do the same thing with Atmos, just on the touchscreen of a Tesla or something. Just have my Atmos mix come up there, put the iPad or whatever. By then we'll be mixing Atmos on iPad. Don't worry about it. And then just be able to mix it in the car to taste as I want. And I think what would be really cool, which I'm not sure if they're implementing this, but to be able to have access, that the software that's playing back the Atmos should have different presets controllable by the user, right? I don't know if this is a thing, and we've never talked about this, but to be able to go, all right, preset 1, preset 2, preset 3 for a stage setup. Do you want it dry and tight? You want it close in the front? Kids are in the back playing. Dad, turn that down. Well, you can flip it to the front and just have a front field, or you can flip it to the back and have just Atmos back there. You know what I mean?
You can do that now with the cars, some of the cars that are enabled. But to your point, it doesn't change like the object placement and how the mix was created. It just, mutes or solos like individual speakers and allows you to set a profile for the seated position. But it doesn't like change the mix itself.
Because, if you could literally just move the objects around, like to hey, well, tell the guys.
Stay tuned. Who knows?
Let's develop
Maybe
it
someday. There's 16 automobile manufacturers announced or on the road today. So, who knows where it's headed in the future other than just bigger and better and with more options.
That's exciting for me. Then the other thing, which I think is just as more rooms are getting, tooled up with great systems and all that, and people start creating in Atmos. I think there's something there. being on the mix side of things, right? At this point in my career, I'm not tracking sessions. I'm not there with the producers anymore. I get, it comes down the internet. I'm mixing and sending it out, So I don't get to be part of that creative process anymore, and also, I'm doing this, the Miles Davis Electric Band just recorded a live show out in San Francisco for San Francisco Jazz. And they sent it to me to mix. It's like a 2-hour show. So it's quite tedious. And the sound guy was like moving faders around and you've got an acoustic thing. I've never mixed deeply a live show like that, but and 2 of the songs have to be records. They're going on the record. So it's like, okay, now these I got to take to another level because they're overdubbing now and adding, oh, I messed up that part. Let me fix that. I'm like, bro. Okay. So it's a really 4D chess with that kind of thing, but we're going to do it in Atmos as well. The live performance video is going to be, and I'm going to be presenting my mix of that on Pure Mix. I'm going to record the show in a couple weeks. So that'll be out in the fall along with the album and the concert on, I think, PBS or something like that.
Nice. Well, congrats on that. And we will look forward to that. And thank you for sharing all of this. Congrats on everything you've accomplished so far. And we'll continue to as well, Rich. Really just appreciate your time and this wisdom. Thanks, man.
Oh, thank you.
Many thanks to Rich Keller for joining me for this conversation and sharing his stories and his technique for mixing these classic records by De La Soul on DMX and Dolby Atmos. You can listen to De La Soul's albums 3 Feet High and Rising, De La is Dead, Balloon Mind State, Stakes is High, and AOI Bionics in Dolby Atmos, mixed by Rich on enabled streaming music services now, as well as several by DMX mixed by Rich, including the classics It's Dark and Hell is Hot and Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood. You can learn more about Rich at his site, richkellermusic.com. To hear more conversations with mix and mastering engineers and producers working in Dolby Atmos, be sure you're subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube in our show notes, or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're curious to know more about Dolby Creator Lab, head to dolbycreatorlab.com to find information about all of our programming, subscribe to our mailing list, and access the entire library of episodes of this podcast. Dolby Creator Lab is also where you'll find the Dolby Atmos Music Accelerator and Dolby Atmos Music Essentials course covering all the topics you need to get started creating content in Dolby Atmos. For other amazing Atmos resources for music creatives, check out the links in our show notes. Of course, everything is completely free and available in multiple languages. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Ben Givarz. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon, and our production coordinator is Karen Marikine. Thanks for joining us.